Welcome to Faith Speaks here on Catholic Radio 102.7 FM. Was it 102.3? 102.3. Yes, 7. I am right. I tell you, my mind some days. Here on Hope FM, and I'm so happy today, and also with Around Town with Brian Blackton, my director, and with me is the Reverend Jason Wells, who is the president of the New Hampshire Council of Churches, and he's different today. When he walked in, I said, "What'd you call him?" He said, "Oh, this is his tartan day." Because I guess, and we used to do that in the legislature. They had tartan day or something to do with Scotland, right?
Right. So the Church of Scotland has its own tartan in Scotland. So this is the ministers, the clergy tartan that exists in Scotland. So that's what I'm wearing today instead of my black and white clergy collar.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious because, number one, you are the president of the Council of Churches, and as you know, as we hear on the radio, TV, newspapers, the coronavirus is all of a sudden becoming worldwide. The cruise ships are loaded with them, and the different countries. Now the United States, in New Hampshire, we've got several, I guess, who've not tested positive, and so on. Everybody's panicking. What have you come out with any directives for the churches at all? As far as Saturday here, the bishop come out with his directives for the Catholic churches. No more wine until further notice, and no more handshaking. No, the peace sign they do. No more of that. You can bump whatever or elbow or whatever, but that's about it. And of course, that doesn't hurt my feelings. Sometimes I sign of pieces, But anyway, so what have you done anything about the other congregations like Episcopalians or Congregationalists, Methodists?
Right. So as the Council of Churches, as the state organization, we do not have a directive for the churches. But what we are doing, because we do have a number of member denominations, we have 9 denominations that are a part of the council.
Yeah.
I have been watching what all of those denominations are saying to their own churches. And if you go onto our website at nhchurches.org/corona, I've been putting together links from what the Presbyterians have posted, what the Episcopalian bishop has said, what the Lutherans are saying, and so on. Because I think it's a good point that you mentioned before. You were at Mass here at Immaculate Heart of Mary, and you had a directive from Bishop Labashi, the Catholic bishop, and he has the authority to make those directives to Catholic churches.
Yeah.
And so this is one of these occasions when denominational authority plays a role. That what the Catholic bishop says does not apply in a Presbyterian church. What the Presbyterians say doesn't go in a Lutheran church, for example. So the Council of Churches, we have little room to give a direction, but we simply want to make sure that people, first of all, know what their own denominations are telling them. And also to put a common point out there to see if, there are a few denominations I have not seen any response from yet. And if there's nothing that you've heard or want to know what other churches are doing because you don't know what to do, there's a good place to go to that website. You can see how other churches are responding. But I think you had identified a few of the things that are sort of common in those reports. Those usually include avoiding at the time of communion, to avoid sharing a common cup or a chalice. A direction about the peace is usually one of those directions as well. There's a lot of different ways to go about that. I think you're saying bumping elbows. Just give a little peace sign, fist bump. I was at a church in Manchester just on Sunday, and on the way to the communion rail and back, there's a little table with some hand sanitizer on it. So as you were walking up, you could squirt some out, and you had enough time to rub your hands before you got there, and you could do that on the way back. I had seen a church in Goffstown where they just bought those small bottles of hand sanitizer, and they were in the racks with the hymnals, so you could,
sure.
while you're there in the pew, if you were going to do that fist bump with somebody, you can clean your hand first. So there's a variety of responses people are having, usually centering around the passing of the peace and how we administer Holy Communion.
I mean, I know the schools have curtailed a lot of activities, some of them, sports and everything, because they're afraid of this stuff. And, you know, it's sad, but, you know, I don't know if it's because the media needed something to fill their news hour for the politics or what, but it's just like it's taken over, and everybody's talking about it. You know, the pharmacies are running out of different supplies that they would need, like the masks or the inhalers or whatever, but you know, it's just, I just wondered how the churches, your churches, were doing, because you know.
So I think some of the concerns that I have heard are, first of all, that you know, I'm always interested to see what things like schools are doing that have younger people in them, because the reports that I've been hearing are that the people who are the most vulnerable to the virus are older, the people who are 75 and older, and of course there's many of people who are 75 and older in our churches. By coming to church, they can be at risk of exposure, and there's a vulnerable population that is in our churches, so we take special care with that. And actually, one thing I heard in a phone call yesterday was from a pastor who herself is older, and recognizing that many of our clergy are older, and it's a challenge to figure out how to be pastors, priests, and clergy right now, because you could make a visit to somebody in the hospital, and you could expose somebody to something you're carrying, or you might be susceptible to something you were exposed to in the hospital. And this conversation was asking, you know, what plans can we start to put in place for making sure that the worship and the ministry life of a church goes on, even if the pastor needs to be quarantined. So what can you lead a worship service from home using technology like Skype or Zoom, or can you deliver your sermon that way? And people are asking those kinds of questions, so that they're taking care of themselves, but also the people that they are ministering to and in contact with.
I don't know if you noticed a little bit of a drop in the attendance at services anywhere. I noticed here sadly there was a drop. You know, interesting that the common flu kills over 10,000 annually, directly or indirectly. But this coronavirus, I mean, I still don't understand how it started in China, but I don't know.
Right. So you were saying about a drop in attendance. I think it's, for most churches, I think it's a little early in that to kind of, to really say in a statistical way that attendance has dropped off. I did read in the news, there was a church in Washington, D.C., a large Episcopal church, where the priest had been in contact with somebody who had corona. And so there were 500 people at church on Sunday, and he shook a lot of hands and gave communion to a lot of people. So if they are under the direction that they should quarantine themselves at home if they went to church that Sunday. I think it was the Presbyterian churches in Washington State. You know, Seattle has been a real center for coronavirus, and I believe the Presbytery for the state of Washington asked people not to come to church this past Sunday. They quite simply asked people to stay home. So I've seen some reporting in the news like that, but I don't know that of anything that has said that there's a drop in worship attendance yet. Of course, those statistics for churches always take a year or more to roll around, so what people see on a Sunday-by-Sunday basis might not be a statistical report yet, just because of that.
Well, it just seems like, I mean, to me the flu season always was earlier, but Washington is mainly due to imports from China.
Yeah, you do have a lot of imports through the docks and shipping that happens. And it's easier to travel, to take a plane and to travel across the Pacific that way.
Mm.
Yeah.
I just, it's crazy, and it is, and partly to the media, because that's all you see in world news and local news. How many every night? That's one of the lead stories. Another case reported in Manchester. Another case reported in D.C. or something, and. Well, Pope Francis, he didn't do anything at the window this week out there in the Vatican.
Right, I did see a picture of a Jumbotron, a giant TV screen set up, so you could see him not at the window in person, but on the screen to make his address.
Yeah, it's true. But,
and I think it's such a good point, because I certainly have noticed, just for myself, it's the only news story on TV, it seems like. As soon as I turn on the TV or the radio, it's the top story, the breaking news, and it's hard to keep ourselves grounded so that we don't overreact, but also so that we don't underreact, right? That we don't go the other direction to say, well, it's flu season, it's all going to blow over, and I got my flu shot, so what do I care? Which is what I appreciate about many of the statements I see from churches, which are, I think, very level-headed. They're very common sense. They reiterate advice from doctors that we wash our hands, that we be careful about knowing if we are an especially vulnerable person, someone who has a compromised immune system or is older, that we watch out for our communion practices, our practices of sharing the peace.
Yeah.
I think those are very simple and common sense things that when we do them, we trust that is not an underreaction and it's not an overreaction, and we can keep ourselves in a place of peace and maybe tune out some of the outrageous stories that we hear.
I know, because it seems like most of the, I won't say dodos, but most of the politicians have dropped out, so now you're down to about 2. So that's kind of like, but now the corona is taking right over the whole thing. And,
I will say, there's a lot of news about coronavirus, but it's been nice to get a break from the presidential election news, because that used to also be the only thing you would hear reported on. So
I'm so sick of emails and stuff asking for money. But now we're also too in the season of Lent. With now this will be coming up the 3rd Sunday of Lent, and I know some of the other churches you represent also do Lent. The Episcopals and the Anglican, Lutheran, Congregational.
Almost all of our member denominations observe Lent in varying degrees of formality or informality, but almost all of them. There are a few that would not, but most do.
Now, I heard from Father Ray that Lent stood for Lenten, lengthen or something like that, and there was a time change or something, I don't know.
Yeah, the word Lent, in almost every other language on the planet, the word is not Lent for Lent. If you look at Spanish, it's Quaresma, it's almost all other languages, the word for Lent is 40. Quaresma is just a 40-day period. I think the Greek Orthodox say Tesserakonta is 40. English is weird in that we don't call it the 40 days, we call it Lent. And Father Ray was correct, that comes from an old English word for lengthen. It is a reference to springtime, and we're enjoying some spring weather for New Hampshire. And it's the lengthening of daylight. That as much as at Christmas time a few months ago, many of us heard sermons that referred to Christ as the light in the darkness of winter. That the days are short, the darkness is long, and now we're in the natural season of Lent, of lengthening of our daylight. I always appreciate the time change this time of year, because you just get more daylight in the evenings and afternoon. Puts me in a better mood. But so that's the meaning of the word Lent. And so that'll continue for a number of other weeks until we get to Palm Sunday on April 5th, and Easter Sunday on April 12th. Except for the Greek Orthodox Easter is the week after. It's 1 week later, so April 19th for the Greek Orthodox churches.
It's funny, in relation to that, I've noticed in the paper that the Palestinians have closed off Bethlehem and, let's see, Bethlehem and someplace out West Bank because of that coronavirus. So the public is not allowed in there now, but for a while. But
yes, yeah. I was actually just in Israel and in Palestine in February. I was there for 10 days with the United Methodist Bishop for New England. And he took a group of about 40, 50 people. So I was just there a few weeks ago.
Did you go in the Church of the Nativity?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we sure did. So we did go to Bethlehem and saw the Church of the Nativity and a number of other sites. But yes, one reflection I could have from there was it was very clear how much tourism is, and the sort of religious tourism, spiritual tourism, the pilgrimages that happen, that tourism is very important to the economy of Israelis and Palestinians. There were many tour buses there from all over the world, and while you could just tell that is important to the local economy. So I mean, they want to take no risks, and I'm certain that they've shut down the travel in the light of that.
I haven't heard much about Jerusalem, but Bethlehem, I know, and there was another place that had closed it down because of it.
Yeah,
so, well, that's interesting. You went over there, and it was the Church of the Nativity is big as that they make it out to be. I mean, I've seen it on internet, but did you have to crawl through a door to get into it? It's like it's a short door.
Yes, not very yes. There is to get into the Church of the Nativity. It's an ancient church. It was built originally in the 4th century. Was destroyed once and then rebuilt, but has been there since about the 7th century. I think it's well over 1,000 years old.
Oh yeah.
And yes, so to enter the church, they call it the humility door, and it's a door that's probably about half as tall as a normal door. I'm looking at the door on the other side of the room here. So it's only a few feet tall. So to enter the church at all, you must bow down. You have to literally humble yourself and bow as you enter. So it's in part for the devotional aspect, and historically, as our tour guide had said, during the period of the Crusaders and as people would sort of come through this area militarily, the church for a number of years was used as stables.
Wow.
So the door was built because you can't put a horse through there. So it's meant to keep the church sacred and not profaned with animals. But it's also a devotional aspect that when we enter the birthplace of Christ, we do so in a reverential posture.
Did you go to the other Bethlehem that's not too far? Supposedly there's 2 Bethlehems. The one they claim the smaller one is where he actually was born.
Oh, we did not. No, there are several. There are several towns that can claim the name of Bethlehem. It's sort of a little bit like how every state has a town named Springfield in it. So Bethlehem in Hebrew is Bethlehem, which means house of bread. If your town was large enough to have a grain mill, you could be a Bethlehem, a house of bread. So it's a common name for towns in the Hebrew world. So there are while the church is in that one location, it is sometimes different scholars, different people will say that it didn't happen at the place of the traditional site; it happened somewhere else. So no, we only visited the church itself and the traditional site.
Well, it had to be interesting to see the spot where they claim that he was born. Isn't there like a star of some sort?
There is, yes. So it's down below the church itself. So you enter that church, and then you wait in line for a very long time because there's a lot of people who want to see, and there are stairs and another kind of small door to go through. So you can only go through one at a time. So people crowd around this door and eventually filter through. And there is on the floor the stone that is we commemorate that as the sort of the stable, the cave, the place where Jesus was born. And there is a silver star on the floor, which has 14 points on it. A 14-pointed star, which is the if you read the scriptures and the genealogy of Jesus, there were 14 generations from King David down to Jesus, because we believe that he was born in the line of King David. So it's a reference to his royal heritage and his claim to be the king.
Wow, interesting. I know this third Sunday of Lent is a special reading that isn't the gospel that I always enjoy listening to. Of all the gospels in Lent, this is the one I like, is where Jesus approaches the woman.
The woman at the well.
Yeah,
yes.
at the well.
Yeah.
Yep. And she's from Samaria?
Samaria. So that was a place we visited. The place of Jacob's well is well known. There's an Orthodox church built on top of it now.
Oh, really?
It's the Palestinian town of Nablus. So you can go there. There's a monastery and a church there that you go to, and there is an Orthodox priest who sort of takes care of the well, and you can go and draw water from it and send the bucket down and drink from it. It's clean, cold water. And you can see the stones that are there, so you can imagine very vividly the woman sitting at the well, Jesus having the conversation with her and
asking her
speaking to her about if you have faith in me, you will have living water that wells up in you unto eternal life. So yeah, that it's. I think it's of all the things to love about the stories of Scripture, having gone to the Holy Land. It's a great reminder that all of these things that you read about in the Scriptures happened in the real world.
Yep,
But it's
it's
easy to be so distanced from the stories that they might have happened in Narnia or a galaxy far, far away. But it's a great reminder that these stories happened in a real world place, and you can go to those places and see the town of Bethlehem and see Jerusalem and see the well of Jacob.
Samaria, they didn't like the Jewish people. They didn't like Jesus or something, or whatever it was.
Right. There was an ancient division between the Jews and the Samaritans from the area of Samaria that goes back at least to the time when of the Babylonian exile. The Babylonian Empire came through, destroyed Israel and Judah, destroyed the temple, and took many of the Jews back to Babylon, and they had to live in another country as captives there. And some of most people had gone off to Babylon or to Persia. Some people remained in Samaria, and when Jews returned to Israel from Babylon, there was fighting between those two groups as to who were the legitimate heirs of Jewish identity and culture. And so they didn't get along. It may go back further than that. There's always a difference. I find there were religious people in the north part of the country and religious people in the south. And the people in the north didn't get along, and they didn't have the same worldview as people in the south, which maybe Americans can sometimes relate to.
But I can remember him asking her for a drink of water, and she said, why am I on your or something like that.
Yeah, the well is deep. You didn't bring a bucket. I can't help you.
And then Jesus says, but you had 7 husbands or something, and all this stuff. And she said, how did you know that? And she runs back to town or whatever and tells all these people that he knew all my.
She becomes a proclaimer of Jesus Christ. She recognizes he's a prophet. She recognizes he's the Messiah. And goes to tell others. So she becomes an evangelist in that moment to tell the whole town.
But of all the Gospels are in Lent, that's the one I really can remember the most. I don't know why, but I know we're coming down to a close, but it's just been... You have I appreciate you sending the articles because I've been putting them in the town crier. I know I've
noticed.
Week, you had in about the prayer cycle for a lot of the churches in Concord.
Yes.
So
on our website, nhchurches.org, we do every week post prayer cycle for the about 400 churches in the state that are affiliated with the councils, and we go through the towns alphabetically. So in March we're doing Concord a lot. So we just prayed for the churches of Concord, but are moving on to some of the others. So
I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. You keep so busy and your family must wonder, where are you half the time?
Oh, no. Well, we've got a lot of good people in our churches, a lot of good leaders who come to our board meetings. There's a lot of activity in our churches right now. There's a lot of health that happens in New Hampshire in our faith communities. So I do it with the support of a lot of people. A lot of pastors, a lot of people in our churches.
Well, very lucky to have you. Know that much. I know the years I've met you, I've really enjoyed talking with you and stuff. Because you just, you're very down to earth.
Well, thank you.
And like I said before, the last one you were on, I said, I'd love to see you give a sermon over here, or give a talk over here.
Well, anybody who wants, I do preach in churches around the state. So if people want to look up our website and get in touch with me, I can take the invitation. I can't go if I'm not invited, but if Father Ray invited me or somebody else out there in New Hampshire wants to invite me to come, I'd be happy to.
I know. Yeah. I still think you'd be a good one.
Or a Lenten class. If churches are doing Lenten classes, there's a few more weeks left.
Yes, they're doing one here. I know.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming down to 2 minutes. Can you believe it? Easter is just a month. Almost, about a month away. Yeah, we're
a couple of weeks away. Yeah, so April 12th will be Easter Sunday for most of us.
Yeah.
And then we move into the month of April has a lot of churches that do Holocaust memorial programs. I know that's a big thing in Concord with Temple Beth Jacob.
Yeah.
So we try to support those things because the churches take part in those. Yeah.
Then you go into Pentecost. And then after that, it's ordinary time to Advent.
Right.
Gosh. Well, with that in mind, thanks for joining us on Faith Speaks, and don't forget to thank our Heavenly Lord every day for all that He does for us, regardless what you may think. He's there listening to us. So, thank you to Reverend Jason Wells. Thank you to Brian for directing, and have a great day on Faith Speaks. I'm Dick Cotton.